Welcome to everyone who's joining us. This is the Door County Library program with Jim Rice. Jim Rice is an avid Packer fan and historian. He became interested in the Packers in 1961. He was from New York, and the Packers beat the New York Giants 37-0. And that caught his attention, and he started reading about the Packers, and then has been doing these talks for 10 years. In the meantime, he became a history teacher, a coach, and a school superintendent. And now he's published 4 books, is it, Jim?
It is.
And we do have them all here in the library if you're interested in coming and checking them out. So without further ado, Jim, tell us about the Packer century.
All right. Thank you, Laura. I appreciate it. And boy, now you took a little wind out of my sails. You told everybody I was from New York. I usually kind of hold that a little bit as a surprise, you know, and I do ask all of you not to dislike me immediately because of that. I know that's always a tough sell, but I've been out here since college, and I did first remember the Packers in 1961 when they played the New York Giants and beat the daylights out of my favorite team back then. Came to college and, of course, was able to easily follow the Packers in Wisconsin. And after college, went to work as a teacher, administrator, coach, and now I'm talking about the Packers. Surprisingly, because after the 2010 Super Bowl, there were 3 Packers on that team that were former New York Giants, and I got kind of interested that way. Ryan Grant, Charlie Pepra, and Jimmy Robinson, the receiving coach, had been former New York Giants. And we all know the history of Lombardi and other connections with New York. And that's kind of how it started for me after retiring as a superintendent. And this is much more enjoyable. So without further delay about me, the picture you're seeing now is, of course, you know, Green Bay East High School and the original City Stadium. And it all really begins here, even though this didn't open until 1925. Of course, you know, it's a beautiful place. You've probably been there, some of you. I've visited during the summertime and went on the field. And, you know, it's oftentimes they talk about sacred ground in sports history, but they don't mention City Stadium. They mention Fenway Park, Wrigley Field, Yankee Stadium. And this place is just as sacred as those, except that no professional team, of course, plays here anymore. But it is sacred ground, and going in there kind of gave me some chills, and history just does that to me. So great place to visit if you have not been there. Memories of the Packers are enshrined in different places on bricks and stones, but the Packers played there from 1925 through 1957. So all the great players in football history before the 50s all played at Lambeau Field or City Stadium. Of course, we have Curly to thank for all of it. He was a visionary. People were very happy in the 1920s, late 1919. They were very happy with football in college, baseball and boxing. And some people thought he was wasting his time trying to start this professional thing, as they often sarcastically referred to it. This was the house Curly's family lived in when he was born on North Irwin Avenue, pretty close to Green Bay East, where he went to high school. Newt Rockne gets into the picture, surprisingly, because Curly decides to go to Notre Dame in the fall of 1918 and plays on Newt Rockne's first team. But at Christmas time, he comes home, and the story goes that he allegedly got tonsillitis, but the main idea is he never went back to Notre Dame, and he missed football, and he ran into George Calhoun, the great editor of the Green Bay Press Gazette, whose grandfather was one of the founders of the great city of Green Bay. And together they kind of thought, well, let's give a try to this pro thing, have players actually practice and be dedicated to the team, and actually pay them for the time they're going to spend working with you and I as new leaders of a professional team. So that's what happened. So what began in 1919 as the Green Bay Packers began a history in the town league initially, where they played other small towns in 1919 and 1920. But it happened to be in 1921, they had done so well, they looked for better competition, and they landed in the American Professional Football Association, which became the National Football League in the next season. So Curley was the man, of course, a visionary, and he knew by the late 1920s that he had to acquire some better players for the Packers to be champions. They were a solid club, but they had never won anything for the first several years in the league. And so the three guys that made all the difference and turned the Packers from a good team into a great one, Johnny Blood McNally, I would say he was the Paul Hornung and Max McGee of his day. He enjoyed the social life as well as the sporting life. And Mike Mikulski, an offensive guard that came over from the Brooklyn team that went bankrupt, I believe, at the time. So he came over in 1928 as well. And one of my favorite Packers is this gentleman, Cal Hubbard. This is a baseball card. And as you can see here, they mention the Packers right away because Hubbard, after he retired, he became an umpire in baseball and was a supervisor of umpires in the major leagues. This is a 1956 card. And he is the only man to this day to be inducted into both the Cooperstown Baseball Hall of Fame and the Football Hall of Fame in Canton. He is just a tremendous player. He's a big guy at 250 pounds back in the day. And he was a star of Curley's first three championships. Those three guys, Blood, Mikulski, and Hubbard, led the way. And the Packers win the championship in 1929. They're undefeated. They outscore their opponents like 190 something to 22. They're a tremendous ball club. Here's Hubbard way over in the corner on the left. And they win also in 1930. Hubbard's right here in the middle. And then they finally win again. Not finally, that's a bad word, but they do win again in 1931. And here's Hubbard right in the back, the biggest guy there. There's Curley in the far left-hand corner. And the great quarterback in the far right-hand corner there is Arnie Herbert. So they win three straight championships, the only team at that point to have done that. The Lombardi Packers, as you know, matched that. And still today, the Packers are the only ones to pull that off. 1932 comes around and something happens. In today's world, the Packers would finish in first place, obviously, with this kind of record. But back in the day, and it wasn't until the 70s, I want to say, that ties here, there's 6 ties for Chicago, 4 for Portsmouth, and 1 for the Packers. They didn't even count these games in the final standings, as you can see, because 6-1 is better than 10-3. So these guys have to fight it out for the championship, while the Packers, the 3-time defending champion Packers, I might add, have to go home at 10-3, and they don't win in 1932 to make it 4 in a row. But they are fantastic in the 30s still. Arnie Herbert's the great quarterback. Probably the best way to describe him is he's the first Brett Favre in Packer history, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Of course, the great Don Hudson, and the other great star in the 30s, Clark Hinkle, a great running back, and all 3 of those guys are in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So in 1936, they finally get into the NFL championship game. Up until 1933, it was not a 2-division league. It was 1 division, and whoever won that division was the champ. Because of that funny thing in 32 with the records of 6-1 versus 10-3, the league knew they couldn't have people arguing over the championship. So they split the teams into 2 divisions and created the final game, which we now know today is the Super Bowl. So the first one really is in 1936, and the Packers really slaughter the Boston Redskins, who are on their way to moving to Washington, and the Packers win 21-6. And of course, you can see right here, the first score is a 48-yard pass from Arnie Herbert to Don Hudson. Even though passing's becoming more common in the 30s, this is still pretty rare to see something like this, especially early on in a game. And one of the things I'm sure all of you know that I enjoyed learning about is how much passing is in Packer history. The Packers are a passing franchise, really have always been, and the Lombardi years were kind of like a little bit of a blip on the radar screen. 3 yards and a 3 yards in a cloud of dust is not the way the Packers have always played. And you can even see it up to this day. We love to throw the ball. So they win in 1936. Great players that still are with them. Buckets Goldenberg, the great Milwaukeean. Cecil Isbell, a very underrated Packer quarterback because he was only there for 5 years. Didn't really love Curly Lambeau too much. But they win the championship in 1939 again. They beat the Giants, New York Giants, 27-0. And this game riled up a few of the people up in your neck of the woods there because Curly Lambeau, along with the NFL and their infinite wisdom, moved the game from Green Bay. So they moved the championship game, Giants-Packers, from Green Bay to State Fair Park in Milwaukee because of money. More tickets could be sold, more seats were in that stadium, State Fair Park, than there were at City Stadium at that time. They raised the ticket prices compared to the year before, and everybody made a lot of money. But I'm sure many, many fans in your area and in Green Bay generally were pretty upset. So the Packers win that game in 1939, but the 40s belong to the Bears. That's why this card is here. The 40s are the Chicago Bears' greatest decade. And the Packers, for 3 or 4 straight years, finished in second place to the Bears. So the rivalry, of course, is heating up at this time. If you can see my cursor here, top left corner, the man in the double-breasted suit is George Halas's brother. Here is George Halas right here. And right here is another famous Chicago Bear. And if you have a Packer or a Bear fan that you just don't know what to say to when they tease you about the rivalry, I'm not sure why they would, because now we're leading the rivalry finally. But what they tend to do is they tend to push the issue at times. And in a very friendly way, all a Packer fan has to say is on this 1956 team card with the ivy of Wrigley Field right in the background, we have the greatest quarterback in Chicago Bear history right here, Sid Luckman, whose last pass was thrown in 1950, I want to say. So the Bears have not had a better quarterback than the guy that was throwing the ball in 1950. We've had a few, so that's all you have to say, and hopefully they're wise enough to tone it down a little bit. So the Bears dominate in the early 40s, but the Packers have some great players as we get into the mid-40s. Tony Canadeo, the great running back, and his number 3 is the one up on Lambeau Field, Hall of Famer, first 1,000-yard rusher in Packer history. Ted the Bull Fritsch, great player on and great person off the field, coach, and did a lot of great things in northern Wisconsin after being a great football player. Big guy, single-handedly won a championship game we'll talk about in a minute. Red Smith is the assistant coach to Curly Lambeau, the only one he had. And Red Smith got into a little bit of a disagreement with Curly, and that's just not what you did. Curly was kind of like, Holmgren and, Lombardi, you don't mess with them. They have their own mind. And Red Smith overstepped his bounds, allegedly, and he was fired. And so he becomes an interesting guy in a year or two here that you'll see. He gets hired by the New York Giants as an assistant coach after Curly got rid of him. 1944 comes around and the Packers win the championship again. It's Curly's 6th championship, the last one. But what makes this especially sweet for the Packers and for Curly was Red Smith, who was with the Giants, ends up playing the Packers as a member of the Giants, as an assistant coach. He plays the Packers in the 1944 championship game. So here the Giants are facing the Packers, and Red Smith, in preparation to make the Giants a great team, convinces the old quarterback of the Packers, Arnie Herbert, to come out of retirement. So Herbert, who had retired a few years back, comes out of retirement. Now it's during the Second World War, where a lot of players did come back as the NFL players served their country. So he comes back and quarterbacks the Giants to the NFL title game. And who do they play but his old Packers? So that would be like Favre playing us in a championship game in our day. But, you know, back in the day, they didn't make such a big deal about this. Football wasn't king like it is. But thank God the Packers, thanks to Ted Fritz's 2 touchdowns, beat the Giants and are the champs. So Curly's time quickly comes to an end. And by 1950, he leaves, he resigns. The Packers weren't winning very much. The board got very much involved, the executive board, in what was going on. And it became tough for him, and he decided to leave. And, you know, as we know, everybody leaves. So Curly was one of the first big ones to do it. The guy who replaced him, ironically, is a former Chicago Bear. He's now the assistant coach for the Bears in 1950, Marquette guy. And so he replaces Lambeau and follows the great legend of Curly. This card is a 56 Packer card. And the reason I have it up here is you have just seen that Gene Ronzani was the first coach to follow Lambeau. He was in Green Bay for 4 years. The next 2 are right here, Scooter McLean and Lyle Blackburn, the 2 coaches. And these 3 guys, starting with Ronzani, along with Blackburn and McLean, are the 3 guys that coached the Packers between Curly and Vince Lombardi. The Packers, as you know, are not very good in the 50s, really bad Mondays. Ronzani, Blackburn, and McLean. Look at the winning. The percentage continues to fall. And when we thought it was bad in the 70s and 80s, it was even worse in the 50s, I think, for the most part. So the 50s are tough, but there are great players on not so good teams, and you can't overlook them. The first guy is Tobin Rote, one of the unheralded Packer quarterbacks in our history. Right after we traded him, he won the NFL championship, the only NFL championship for the Detroit Lions. He also won the AFL championship with the San Diego Chargers, I believe, in 1963. Rote was a great quarterback for the Packers, but on losing teams. He led the team in both passing and running the ball in rushing yards in 2 of those 7 years, and a very highly thought of guy. I love this card because he kind of looks like Superman. The first African-American player for the Packers is Bob Mann. And I tease some people saying, you know, he makes a catch like Odell Beckham did, but Mr. Mann made it back in 1950. So Bob Mann, a great Packer receiver. Billy Houghton, the greatest Packer receiver in the 50s, and ran into Lombardi and had a little trouble and was traded. John Martin Kovic, big defensive lineman. As you can see, he has a blue and gold uniform on. That, of course, is commemorating Curly Lambeau's brief interaction with Notre Dame and Lambeau's continued love of Notre Dame. And so the Packers often in the past were blue and gold until Lombardi showed up, and then it was permanently green and gold. So Martin Kovic actually gets traded to the Giants, and the Packers get a draft pick to use to draft Ray Nitschke. So that's how Ray Nitschke becomes a Giant cheesehead, which is one of my books. So much for that self-promotion. So the 50s are over. Lombardi comes in 1959. He's an assistant coach on the staff of the New York Giants and highly thought of in that regard. And he comes from that sideline that's also occupied by this gentleman over here, the great Tom Landry, who the following year goes to lead the new team, the Dallas Cowboys. And we all know how they eventually met up in some important games in the future. So Lombardi comes to Green Bay in 1959. This is a 1958 card. And Bart Starr, as you know, was already here before Lombardi. Those people who know things about Stevens Point, I believe, told me this is a picture, as well as this next one here, of Ron Cramer of the old high school, or the junior high in Stevens Point. The Packers did train there during the summers. And so Cramer is already on board, great tight end for the Packers. Great Packers in the 50s, Bobby Dillon, just inducted into the Centennial class in the Football Hall of Fame, one of the select 10 that were inducted last year. Still leads the Packers in interceptions. Great player, and was blind in one eye, and you may know that already. But Lombardi comes finally in 59. He meets Jack Venisi, who's the talent scout that Ronzani brought from Chicago, and they become very good friends. And Venisi is the guy that drafted all the great Packers. Monument across from Lambeau Field, honoring the great Venisi. And his brother, of course, led the Chicago Bears back in the 80s to do some wonderful things in the Super Bowl, that 85 team. So a great family, and the Packers benefit greatly. Unfortunately, Venisi died young and never saw the fruits of his labor. All these great championship teams we're about to talk about. Here's the 61 Packer team. The 61 team gets to the NFL championship in Lombardi's third year, and they completely dominate the New York Giants to win the first title, 37-0, the first title for Lombardi, and the first one since 1944 for the Packers. Paul Hornung, of course, the great running back, Hall of Famer, popular guy all around. And Hornung had a great game against the Giants, scored 19 points because Lombardi had called the president, John F. Kennedy, JFK at the time, and they were able to get Hornung on a long leave over a weekend so he could play in the game. And I'm sure the Giants are still shaking their heads about that one. Besides Hornung, Jim Ringo, the great offensive line leader, followed by Jerry Cramer, Hall of Famer himself, Fred Fuzzy Thurston, great Green Bay Packer, Bob Skoronski, who passed away, I believe, just recently, and the great Forrest Gregg, who's also not with us. So the Packers also win in 1962. They beat the Giants again at Yankee Stadium, 16-7. And I'm not jumping away from this card too quickly. Those of you that are sharp Packer fans in the audience noticed something already, I'm sure, but we will get to that in a minute. So they beat the Giants again, 16-7. It's the great game of Jimmy Taylor versus Sam Huff of the Giants, the great linebacker. Brutal game, cold, windy in Yankee Stadium. Some people thought it was worse than the Ice Bowl. Sam Huff, of course, the great linebacker, and he and Taylor have quite a game. But the Giants come up short again, 16-7. And in those two consecutive championship games, the Giants never scored an offensive touchdown. So the Packer defense during those days sometimes is overlooked now, but the Giants only scored off a blocked punt. So 1963 comes along. Ray Nitschke finally gets his first card, even though he's been on the Packers for a few years. The great Willie Davis, great offense or defensive end, came over from Cleveland, one of Lombardi's trades, and the great Lionel Aldridge, who, when I first came to Wisconsin for college, he was a broadcaster on WTMJ in Milwaukee. He had a great voice. He was the only defensive rookie ever to start for Vince Lombardi, and quite a player. And you may know of his history was not good after playing football and after being a broadcaster and all along. And he died a homeless man. He suffered some, I believe, from schizophrenia, and just a sad situation. But Lombardi loved him, and he was a great Packer. Henry Jordan, another great Packer. This man died way too young from a massive heart attack, I believe. Hall of Famer. And those of you from the Milwaukee area, he was the first director of Summerfest. And Henry Jordan, a great civic man as well, but a great Packer, and also, I believe, a former Cleveland Brown as well, I believe. Willie Wood, great defensive back. Wood was a quarterback of USC in 1960, and there were very few black quarterbacks back in the day in 1960, and nobody wanted him when he got out of college. He wrote some letters, and the only guy to answer him was Vince Lombardi, and he allowed Wood to come up for a tryout. He was impressed by him, but Lombardi had to inform him, which I'm sure Wood knew, right, that the Packers already had a great quarterback in Bart Starr. And so he kept Wood and converted him into a safety. And along with his great safety from back in the New York days, great defensive back, Emlyn Tunnell, they tutored Willie Wood and Herb Adderley, but mostly Wood, into being quite a defensive back and a great punt returner and kickoff returner. So Willie Wood also makes a fantastic impact in the backfield defensively. Herb Adderley, his running mate, another great player on those early Packer winning teams. Boyd Dowler, some people call him the Randy Moss of his day. And then we have the 1963 Packer team. And those sharp fans out there will notice that this is the same picture that was used on the 61 and 62 and now 63 card. They made it a little smaller, so we couldn't quite pick it up. But here's Billy Houghton right here on number 86. And Houghton was one of the first guys Lombardi traded when he arrived, because Houghton was involved in setting up the players union. So Houghton is not around. He's playing with Dallas by this time, certainly by 63. So it's interesting that they would use the same photo, but Houghton just jumps right out. So it can't slip by too many of us. So, but in the day as a child, it slipped way by me and never thought twice. So the Packers do not win in 63, partially because you may remember Paul Hornung here, the great Packer, the great Notre Dame Heisman Trophy winner. He gets caught gambling along with his buddy, Alex Karras of the Detroit Lions. And together they're suspended for one entire year. So they sit out that year. So 63, these are interesting cards because you will never see Lombardi on one of the old football cards. You see him a lot now on commemorative things, but this was kind of the only one from the old days. And he looks like a little accountant here. He's got his tie on, which he also had to be because he ran the whole operation. So 65, the Packers, here's the great Curly Lambeau meets Lombardi. This gets on the cover of the yearbook. Lombardi doesn't like it. And it's a long story about Lombardi not particularly caring for Curly. Curly was very different from Lombardi. Curly was kind of like McGee and Hornung, and Lombardi, as you know, was a very religious man. But so here they are on the cover, and 65, the Packers finally get back on top again. They win the NFL title, and they actually get to play the NFL championship, the last NFL championship game before the Super Bowls began in 1965. And they get to play that game up in Green Bay with some of these new players, as I'm showing you, having joined the team. And it's nice for the Packers to be back in the championship. Great photo here. Paul Hornung running in that game against the Browns, the mud. And whenever you see that commercial of Paul Hornung running in the mud around the left end, it's a commercial during the game often. That's from the 1965 championship game that the Packers won 23-12 over the defending champion Cleveland Browns. Forrest Gregg right here and Bart Starr right here. So great photo. And so they win in 65. Here they are in Sports Illustrated. Excuse me one second. Here's the photo. So they win in 65. That's Lombardi's third title. 66, they're favored again. Jimmy Taylor's picture there on the cover of the football magazine. And in 66, the winner of the NFL title game, which the Packers were, had to go to the Super Bowl because the two leagues, the NFL and the AFL, the American Football League, merged, and the two teams, the champions of the two teams or of the leagues, are going to play for the title. The Packers win the game, and a big part of the win was a second half interception by Willie Wood to turn the momentum of the game clearly over to the Packers, and the Packers win the game. Max McGee, you may remember, had the great catch for the first touchdown pass in Super Bowl history. This is not it, but this is the Super Bowl, but this is another pass during that game. Empty seats, because it wasn't believed to be a permanent thing back then. It was a one-time only, a one-off, so to speak, and we know how that went. There's McGee on the cover of Sports Illustrated. Bart Starr, of course, is the most valuable player in that first Super Bowl. And the Packers are the 1966 NFL champions. But here they talk about 1967, but it's the conclusion of the 1966 season. So they've won in 65 and 66 and 67. They're still a strong team, but they're getting older. And they do win the title again, the divisional title, but it's more of a struggle as the team ages a little bit. Some younger players that have come on since a year or two back. Gail Gillingham, the great guard for the Packers. Donnie Anderson, of course, and we know Jim Grabowski. These two guys who are the Gold Dust twins because they were the first players of the new age where rookies began making more money than the veterans. And that was not well received by a number of Packers. But these guys come on with the 67 squad. The great Kenny Bowman also is on the Packers at this point. Great center from Wisconsin. He's a Badger. And Bowman often doesn't get the credit he deserves for that great block in the Ice Bowl with Jerry Cramer. And so in the Ice Bowl, here we've got Bart Starr actually at that moment talking with Zeke Bredkowski and Vince Lombardi about the play he's going to run to win the Ice Bowl. And of course that happens and they go on to defeat Oakland in the second Super Bowl. So this is a great game and a memorable one because Super Bowl II, of course, was Vince Lombardi's last game. And the Packers had now won the first two Super Bowls and Lombardi retires. In that Super Bowl, Don Chandler kicks 4 memorable field goals. Darryl LaMonica, George Blanda, and John Madden in the background of this card. So that they win that second Super Bowl, and the Packers are riding high, but Lombardi, as we know, moves upstairs the next year to be the general manager. And in 1968, things turn south a little more quickly than they had hoped. So from 1968 up until the arrival of Mike Holmgren in 1992, bad days start getting infectious. The Packers are awful. So from 68 to 92, the winning percentage goes from under 500 to way under 500. So as the Packers progress through the 70s and 80s, things are not so good. And they had great players again. You know, you do always have great ones that are memorable. And this one, of course, John Brockington is a great Packer. And on a special card here with Mr. Simpson, no doubt. So 1979, the actual shadow of Vince Lombardi is put on the Packer media guide because now Bart Starr is coach of the Packers for, I believe, 9 years. Great quarterback, not as good of a coach, had some rough days. Freddie Carr, great linebacker in the 70s. Johnny Gray, defensive back. John Hadel, who Packer fans will just cringe when they see this one, right? Because we traded 5 draft choices for Mr. Hadel, 2 first round, 2 second rounds, and a third round. And this hindered Bart Starr a little bit when he became coach right after this trade occurred, pretty much the next year. And it was a memorable moment in a not so good way for the Packers. And the trade was initiated, of course, you may remember, by Dan Devine, who was coaching the team then. Eddie Lee Ivory, late 70s. And here we are, 1978, James Lofton, great player for the Packers, and Willie Buchanan. Ezra Johnson was the Packer line or defensive back that was caught eating a hot dog on the bench one day, during one game. So he's quite a memorable guy in his own right. Chester Marcol, of course, in the 80s as the Packer kicker. Lynn Dickey, a very underrated Packer quarterback, had injury issues, didn't have great surrounding casts all the time. And Dickey's right up there in Packer history. Larry McCarron, the great center, of course, now the radio voice of the Packers, the color man with Wayne Larrabee. Tim Lewis, great defensive back, was injured and Never played again after that Monday Night Football game against Chicago in the mid-'80s. John Anderson, great linebacker for the Packers from Waukesha, attended the University of Michigan. And in the mid-'80s, Forrest Gregg comes. Bart Starr was not able to bring the magic of Lombardi back, and so they tried to see if Forrest Gregg could do it to be the coach. He didn't have much luck. His big arch enemy was Mike Ditka of the Bears, and they had some real tough games and really unsportsmanlike games. Both coaches lost control of their teams in the rivalry in the mid-'80s. Mark Lee tossed Walter Payton over the bench, and only Mark Lee got ejected from a rough game against the Bears. Excuse me. Walter Payton, a great running back, great person from the Bears, always had very good games against the Packers. George Cumby, the great, or I shouldn't say great, but a solid Packer linebacker. Unfortunately, he had the unfortunate experience. There's no other word for it, really. When William the Refrigerator Perry ran over Cumby in that famous Monday Night Football game, I believe in 1985. And Charles Martin, the other infamous Packer, he had quite a game because he got out of line and picked up the opposing quarterback for the Bears, Jim McMahon, and threw him down to the turf. The defending champion Chicago Bears, this is in 1986. And Mr. McMahon couldn't happen to a nicer guy. Mr. McMahon suffered a shoulder injury, and the Bears did not repeat as Super Bowl champs. Late 80s, Lindy Infante comes along, Packer coach, and there's a spark of light with Don Mikowski as the quarterback. The 1989 season is one for the record books. Anthony Dilwig, the Packers backup at that time, he is the great-grandson of Lavi Dilwig, who played for the Packers and was a great end in the 1920s and 30s. Who could forget Mr. Mandrich, top draft choice by the Packers back in the day in 1989. And of course, by the late 80s, early 90s, Bob Harlan is in charge of the Packers. He had worked his way up through the organization. Great Packer, the Packer rebirth, this man is responsible for. So when we think of the run the Packers have been on since 1992, this is the man you need to give credit to first before you even look to the football field. He did some magic, and we still thank you very much for that. So Harlan comes on board and things change. He hires Ron Wolf. They hire Mike Holmgren, and they put their careers on the line by drafting a party-happy quarterback, #1 draft choice the year before by the Atlanta Falcons. The Packers took a chance, and we know how well it turned out. Favre, just a tremendous quarterback. Certainly after years of losing, we gave him a little latitude with the interceptions, but nonetheless, great quarterback. The third member of that triumvirate, you've got Holmgren, you've got Favre, and now, of course, they bring Reggie White in 93 after he was impressed by Brett Favre in one of the games he played against him. And those guys lead the Packers on to eventually that great championship that we all remember in 1996. We probably all remember where we were and how we felt, because it was long in coming. Though I was a Packer fan, I certainly couldn't have had the same feelings as all you guys who have been with them your whole lives. And but it was a great, great experience, and I couldn't have been happier. Of course, great players, Gilbert Brown, solid anchor of that defensive line, the great Leroy Butler, who hopefully will get into that Hall of Fame soon. And in 1994, the Packers play their last game in Milwaukee, where they've been playing since the 1930s. And Favre has that memorable moment of diving into the end zone to beat the Atlanta Falcons, and the Packers went on to the playoffs. And this is 1994, I see right here. Dorsey Levens, great running back for Green Bay. And of course, Sterling Sharp bringing the ball back to Brett, hoping for another pass in his direction. Brett's favorite target in the end zone, of course, Antonio Freeman. excuse me. Here's a picture of Freeman on Sports Illustrated against the Carolina Panthers in the first NFL or NFC championship game at that point against the Carolina Panthers. It's the first NFL title game up in Green Bay since the Ice Bowl, and it's certainly a very cold day like the Ice Bowl. And so the Packers are able to beat the Carolina Panthers to become the NFC, the National Football Conference championships, and get to their first Super Bowl since 1968 in Vince Lombardi. It's in Favre's hometown, couldn't be better for him. And he certainly played like he was home. Favre had a great game, a couple of touchdown passes. He scored one himself and led the way as usual with the spirit and excitement that he brought to the football field. And he led us all the way. So Reggie, of course, helped close it out in that second half. He sacked Bledsoe, the quarterback, Drew Bledsoe here of the Patriots 3 times. And the Packers put away the Patriots of Bill Parcells 35-21. Desmond Howard goes to Disneyland. Remember back in the day, everybody did that as the MVP. The publications locally and nationally have some nice things for the Packers, connecting it, of course, to the past, the glorious past, which would now be kind of paired up with the glorious future. So they have a great run. They don't win another Super Bowl. They got back to one, but lost. Reggie dies way too young, and the Packers move into the next century, hoping for a new stadium. And finally, in 2003, it materializes and it saves the franchise literally. And this was Bob Harlan's project. So it helped secure the future. If you haven't been there, you must. If you're local, and even if you're not, it's a great destination place. Come in the summertime if you can. Vince Lombardi, Curly Lambeau. But if you come in the wintertime, we know you're here for good reason. So you'll enjoy it when you're there for a game or even just for the visit. It's a good town, and there's a lot more to do than just football. And Donald Driver is now the leading receiver in Packer history, and kind of like Bart Starr, you know, a greater person than he is a player, which is kind of hard to do. But Driver certainly is one of the ones that do that kind of thing. And, you know, we're very fortunate to have him. What a leader. Mike Sherman, coach in the early 2000s for several years. Whoops, I want one more here. 2004, here's Brett's on the cover of the yearbook. He's hemming and hawing a little bit by this time about whether he's going to play the next year. McCarthy comes to coach the Packers in 2005. They draft Mr. Rogers. Look at how young he is. Their first round draft choice. And so Brett Favre has his replacement on the team. Favre's last card here in 2007, that magical season where the Packers were able to get to almost the Super Bowl. Great card here with Driver, Favre, and Amon Green, the leading rusher in Packer history, as well as these guys, the passing leader and reception leader. Cover from the Sports Illustrated after beating Seattle in 2007. Ryan Grant, great running back, acquired from the Giants early in the season in 2007, and was a leading rusher for the Packers, and I believe is the 5th leading rusher in Packer history, 5th or 6th. Quite a player for a couple of years. Brett Favre wins the Sportsman of the Year. It was that magical season of 2007. Unfortunately, they don't win. They lose to the Giants, and Favre then begins his retirement and then changes his mind, and the great divorce is upon us. So I'm certainly glad this is over, and I'm sure you are too. 2010, the Packers, a couple of years after Brett, Mr. Rogers has them back in the Super Bowl, and they play very well in 2010. And you could see it, you know, happening 2009. They got to the playoffs, but they lost a tough game to the Cardinals. But 2010, they were an excellent team, offensively and defensively. Of course, they had a chance to get back Brett Favre, who had beaten them twice the year before as a member of the Vikings. And they get to the playoffs, and Tramon Williams intercepts Michael Vick on the closing drive, and the Packers defeat the Eagles in Philadelphia. Rodgers upsets the #1 seed Atlanta Falcons with one of his best games even to this date. And they go on to play the Chicago Bears for the right to go to the Super Bowl. The last time the Packers played the Bears in the postseason was 1941. It's the only other time they lost, and it was the week before Pearl Harbor. So this game, very special, the second postseason game between them. And the Packers, as you know, win that really tight battle with a touchdown by Rodgers. B.J. Raji's great interception, and of course the supersized dance in the end zone. And the Packers are on to North Texas to take on the Pittsburgh Steelers, who we are meeting this Sunday again for the third time since that Super Bowl in 2010. By the way, we haven't beaten them since then. We lost in 2013 and I believe in 2017. So we need to get back on track with beating the Pittsburgh Steelers. But we beat them in the most important game. Nick Collins interception early in the game to turn things Green Bay's way early. Rodgers and Nelson Jordy had quite a game, as well as Rodgers and Greg Jennings had a fantastic game. Here's the celebration beginning at the end, of course, with the championship belt and the trophies. And here is that great 2010 team with all the coaches. Remember back in the day, it was just little old Red Smith. And now we've got, since now we're 10 years later, there's probably a few more rows. So here we go after the Super Bowl, the great publications. I'm sorry, I went a little fast there. Big Cheese, Nick Collins there. Very appropriate title for us. The Packers back on top, Sports Illustrated. All the publications begin to come out about, you know, how great this team is, how connected it was to previous teams. Then the next year, of course, we're almost perfect in 2011. We got to, what was it, the Kansas City game. We had won 19 games in a row before losing to the Giants. So in 2012, the Fail Mary, that great, awful, I shouldn't say great, awful call in Seattle by the replacement referees who were dismissed the next day, and the regular refs came back. The Packers lost this game on this controversial play, which cost them a home playoff game later in the year. So we are in 2012. Donald Driver, of course, eventually retires in 2013, being the dancing man as well, but a great man who danced his way and caught his way and ran his way into our hearts. After he's gone, Eddie Lacy, great running back for the Packers for several years. Rodgers in 2013 has a great game, has a great season. And in 2013 is the season you may remember where he hurt his collarbone. He hurt his collarbone against the Bears in late October. We wondered if he was coming back. He finally came back to play in the last game of the regular season against the Bears. Winner take all, loser goes home. And the last minute, 48 seconds, I think, when the play began, a pass to Randall Cobb, who of course we know is back, beats the Bears. It's the first time since I want to say in the 30s that they played the Bears on the final game of the season that decided a championship. So a great moment in Packer history. Another great moment is the year later against the Bears. This is the game where Rodgers threw 5 touchdown passes. Or was it 6? 5 or 6 in the first half. I think it was 6. And tying Darryl LaMonica's record. And the Bears were just blown out 55-14, and I couldn't resist buying the Chicago paper the next day, because here's their headline after the Bears lost 55-14 to the Packers at Lambeau Field. Lambeau Bleep. So the Packers solidly defeat the Bears there. In 2014, Rogers wins his MVP. Again, another MVP. And in 2015, we have some issues with Jordy Nelson, where his, 16, Jordy Nelson's injury upsets the offense. Things never get on track. Brett Favre comes back to finally retire and to make amends, if you will, in Green Bay. Here's Frankie Winters over here. There's Brett. Great picture. One of my favorite pictures. I believe this is Ted Thompson. Deanna's right there. William Henderson. So there's a few there for us. And great to have him back in the fold, and all is forgiven, at least on my part. And so the Packers have some great games still in 2017. They don't get back to the Super Bowl. That great catch by Jared Cook and the great kick by Mason Crosby at the end of the 16 season, where after Cook makes that catch, the next game they defeat Dallas in Dallas, but Crosby had a kick that I believe a 50-yard boot twice because the Cowboys called timeout, but he nailed it the second time as well. After 2017, the Packers take the lead. This is when they tied, but they would eventually take the lead in the rivalry against the Bears. The first time they do have the lead since 1932. So it's been quite a while. And so they go up on the rivalry in September of 2017. So here we go as we get to the close. The Packers beat the Bears in the greatest comeback, fourth quarter comeback in Packer history. And this is 2018, the 100th season for the Packers. Great catch by Geronimo Allison. And in 2018, here we have the great Davante Adams on the cover. Best receiver in the league, of course, for the last few years, finally getting that recognition. Mr. LaFleur on board in 2019. What coach has ever started out 13-3 twice? None for the Packers. So we certainly take our hats off to what he's done early. And the Packers, have some other great games since the 2010 season, of course, but they always turned out to be losses, it seemed. Here we finally beat the Seahawks in 2020 in the postseason, 28-23. And so we are having success, but it's tough to get back to the big game. And I think we're all a little spoiled because we expect that every year. The last card for you in the Packers century is the quarterback card I was lucky enough to buy in 2006 before we knew anything really about Rodgers, and have them all on the same card is pretty special. This concludes the Packers Century program. If you like this, check my website, packerscentury.com. We have not only several books for sale, but I finally completed just recently writing about every Packer game ever played, which is called the Packers Century. And you may want to take a look at that, 1,466 games. So thank you, everyone. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Jim. That was really amazing. I don't know how you can remember all those details. But well, I did notice.
It's good because you love it, so it's easy.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I did notice also on your website that you have some really good fan stories and videos.
Yes.
Those are fun to hear.
Yes, that's a big part of the Packers Century because there's nothing like Packer fans.
Yeah, and, that's for sure.
What I did is I went back, or I'll just tell you real quickly, I went back and looked at every Green Bay Press Gazette and pulled out stories from 1919 on forward. And it's really something, as well as all the other national and local publications. So it's more than just the games, but the games are the centerpiece.
That's for sure. Have you heard of Walter Lejeune or Walter Jeune? He was in the 26 season, 1926.
I have, but I can't, to be honest with you, I can't tell you a lot at all, to be honest. I mean, 26, they were building some great teams. Is he somebody that you're familiar with?
Yes, the Packer historian Cliff Crystal asked about him at one time. He had a house in Bailey's Harbor and spent a lot of time here and actually passed away in that house in Bailey's Harbor. So I think of him as a Door County, even though he wasn't from here originally, as a Door County Packer.
Yeah. One time, several years ago, I got to meet the Packer Golden Girl.
Oh,
Who
yes,
lives
and
right in
she
your,
was up here also, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
she lives right around the bay right there. I was to her home and she showed me all her collectibles and things and even did a little cheer for me while I was there,
Wow.
which was really special. Is she
Yeah.
still doing well? Is she, do you know?
Steve
Yeah,
Johnson is here. Yeah.
yeah. Last time I saw her, she was fine. A lot of the gals in my high school class were part of the Golden Girls,
Oh, boy.
and they're still around. And they got together a while back at the Door County Museum with Mary Jane, isn't it? And
Yes, yes.
Yes.
and got pictures of them and all that. I was there when it happened. My wife is also in the same class, Sturgeon Bay High School, 1965.
Oh, boy.
I guess Curly died on her front lawn,
That's what I've heard.
That's
Yes.
the legend.
right next to
Yeah.
the old high school.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. And when I was there, I didn't have time to go see the house. I know it's still right close by there and I didn't have a chance to see it, but
It's right next to the Episcopal Church at Fifth in Michigan,
okay.
right?
But boy,
Laura?
she had quite a collection of memorabilia in her home. It was beautiful.
Yeah. Can I say something?
Sure.
A couple of really minor points, but they're great. You mentioned Ken Bowman.
Yes.
I graduated from law school with him.
Well, I'll tell you, I got to reach
72.
behind me here. I got to show you something.
And I got to know him in when he was, I think he was running in politics at one point in Green Bay.
Can you see this okay?
No,
you
hold
can't
it
'cause
up by your face.
Yeah, yeah, I can't, I don't have
It's
it.
not in the picture.
Yeah, oh, silly
Okay.
me. Here, how about this?
Oh, yeah,
Yes.
definitely.
Okay,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
I gotta tell you, Bowman is kind of like an unsung hero for me because, you know, the poor guy never gets credit for what he did in that block in the ice bowl, and it kind of bothers me, you know, and and I even talked to Donnie Anderson about it a little bit. But you know, if it was without Bowman, that block that Jerry threw probably never would have happened. You know, I mean, if you look at the play, he hits Jethro. I almost said Jethro Tull, Jethro Pugh, right, you know, in his upper part of Jethro Pugh's body, which gave Cramer the chance to get him low. And so I do love Mr. Bowman, and a friend of mine, he's an attorney, I guess, in Arizona, and a friend of mine down the block here who used to work at Concordia College here in Mequon knows him, and so he got this card for me just recently. So he's my
Wonderful.
guy. I just love him.
Well, anyway, he graduated in 72. He's
Okay.
5 years going to law school. Usually it's only 3.
What?
He did it part-time while he was a player, which is
Wow.
Wow.
amazing. I don't know how he did it, but he did.
Wow, that's amazing.
And I met him after there was a case in Door County with former Miss America from De Pere. I forgot her name.
Terry Ann Mewson.
Yeah, Terry Ann
Oh, yeah,
Mewson.
Terry Mewson.
Yeah, her sister had a accident in Door County. And so there was a lawsuit, and Kenny was on a team for her
Oh,
action. And so I got a chance to talk to Ken quite a bit up here, right in Sturgeon Bay, that'd be a block from Curly Lambeau's place where he was staying with his friend.
okay.
So that's one of the things.
Well, you know, my buddy put his phone number here on the back.
Yeah.
But I don't have the guts to call him. I'm too nervous, you know, I'm too much of a fan, you know, and he's
a real nice guy.
yeah, and you know, I felt bad for him because as I learned about the history of the team, you know, he and Anderson and those guys, they were the new generation, you know, and the older guys weren't going to share their fame as much as maybe they should have. And I think that's kind of how Bowman got caught there a little bit, you know, but certainly Cramer deserves most of the credit, but you know, Bowman deserves his part too.
And two more things. I'll try to make them quick.
Okay. That's okay. I could talk to you all
Quite a
day,
while
as
ago,
Laura says it's
Laura-
okay.
Quite a while ago, Laura's uncle got some tickets to the Packer game for my dad, and my dad invited me. That'd be Bob Cafton. And we went to the game, went to that game, basically. It wasn't the Ice Bowl. I'm one of the few people in the world that say I never went to the Ice Bowl.
You're being honest, right?
Huh? It was really cold, though.
Yeah.
I remember taking my sleeping bag, and we were in our sleeping bags, my dad and me in the stands, and there was nobody around us. Tickets. I remember going into the causeway or whatever to get warmed up a little bit, but I can't remember what game that was. It was like the second coldest ever, and nobody cared about the game. And I think it's because we had a crummy coach and everything else.
Yeah.
But it was hard to get a ticket anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. What year was it about? Do you know what year?
Oh man. Somehow I think it's between 69 and 72 when I was in law school, but I could be wrong.
Okay.
Could be
Okay.
a little later.
Because I've written about it. It's in the Packers Century. So if you're interested, check it out and see if you can find it. But it's in there.
The different games.
Yeah, I've written about
Yeah.
all 1,466
But it had to be a game that nobody went to. Basically. It was so cold and the Packers were so bad that and maybe Dan Devine was the coach. I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, Laura, I was just mentioning that I've written 4 books, but what I've just completed is the Packers Century, which is a digital download of all 1,400 games. Because
Wow.
I thought I would never put that in a book, it'd be like the Bible. It'd be so thick, So
And the last thing, I wanted to grab you by the collar, and Laura knows what I'm going to say, I think. But my grandpa ran a ice cream and dairy, Pleck Ice Cream and Dairy, 1896 to 1920, and then beyond. But anyway, Hagemeister, which is the first field
yes.
played on, Hagemeister Brewing bought out his pop plant in beginning of 1919 and hired him as a manager for the brewery up here. But the reason why they did was right at the beginning of the year, that's the year Prohibition came in.
Yes.
And Hagemeister was basically bankrupt because of that. Something else. And so they hired my grandpa. They bought his plant and hired him because he knew how to make pop and ice cream and how to use cold storage, which is exactly what they needed to convert their beer processing plants into. They subsequently made another company, Hagemeister Products. And what I say is Hagemeister's future was a little bright, then they finally went, whatever.
Yeah.
The reason why the Packers were able to play on that field is because there was a bright light at the end of the tunnel when they hired my grandpa, who was the best pop bottler in northeastern Wisconsin. A lot of breweries had the same problem at that time. They were totally out of business and they needed to convert, and soda pop was what they converted to.
Wow. That is something. I mean, when you think back about 100 years ago, the pandemic, the Packers, the end of the First World War, it's just amazing time, and the fact that they pulled off a football team in 1919 with all the boys coming home,
Yep. So anyway.
Well, that's why we have such passionate fans, also the community so involved in the team.
Yeah.
Our sheriff for a long time, Baldy Bridenhagen, was a member of the Packers board, our county sheriff.
Oh, wow. I do have a good story if you have a minute. If I could, is it okay, Laura, to tell this story?
Yeah, yes, I think we have time.
You think, okay. And are there any children in the audience?
No.
Okay. And it's not bad, but I always say that ahead of time. You had mentioned early in the evening that I'm from New York, and I watched the 1961 championship game as a fan of the New York Giants, Y.A. Tittle, Del Schaffner, Gifford, all those guys. Well, I'm from a family of New York policemen and firemen. And so my family would travel into New York City from Long Island to Brooklyn on New Year's Eve all the time. And in 61, that game was played in Green Bay right on New Year's Eve, if I'm thinking correctly. And I was so excited to see the Giants beat this team from God knows where. You know, I was 8 years old. I had no idea where Green Bay was, but I can tell you, I probably already had that New York thing going, you know, not thinking it was important because it wasn't in New York, you know. So I watched the game, but before the game, my uncle, who's also a police officer at the time, God bless him, he was also a bookie. And figure that one out, you know, but he came up to me and he said, before the game started, he said, Jimmy, the Giants were going to get their ass kicked by the Packers. And I was 8 years old, and I'm sure the word ass just, you know, I probably ran to my dad to tell him that Uncle Harold said that word, you know, but he told me that, and I couldn't believe that he would think that a team from, you know, Green Bay, wherever the Green Bay was, could beat my New York Giants. And boy, was he right. And, you know, it's kind of funny because I come out to Wisconsin for college, and then I end up doing this unexpectedly after I retire. It's just kind of a crazy full circle kind of story. So I like telling that one.
Yeah, that is a good story. Well, I think it's time to wrap up. So thank you very much, Jim. That's been really informative and entertaining.
You're welcome, and spread the word. My website is packerscentury.com, and I'm always here if you need me. And I wish the best to our team. We certainly bounced back from the first game, and it should be a very interesting season.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great night.
Night.